Premier, Manitoba has implemented a 14-day quarantine for anyone coming into the province due to concern around the variants. Alberta's provincial health officer also saying that might be a consideration. Why hasn't BC done something similar to this, and is this something that is being considered?
Well, we took a good look at the legal and other ramifications of bringing forward restrictions for non-essential travel. We discussed that briefly last week. Until such time as the public health officer advises me that there's a benefit to going down that road, we're going to leave it untraveled for the time being. That's not to say we won't go in that direction, but the differences between Manitoba and British Columbia, I think, are obvious to most people. There are 4 roads in and out of Manitoba. There are dozens of roads in and out of British Columbia. We have major airports. There is but one major airport in Manitoba. I've certainly been working with Premier Pallister and other premiers across the country on travel issues. These are important issues for British Columbians. The public health evidence is not there at this time. Dr. Henry assures me that when that evidence is there, she'll present it to me, and because of the work we've been able to do, we may be in a better position to take action at that time. What we want to focus on now is if you are coming to British Columbia on non-essential travel, I was going to say something and I'll pull back. You better behave appropriately. You better follow our public health guidelines or we'll come down on you like a ton of bricks. If you're coming here for non-essential activity, you need to abide by the rules and regulations that all British Columbians are following.
The Prime Minister has suggested there are new restrictions coming on travel. He sort of hinted to Canadians not to go outside on holidays out of the country for fear they might not be able to get back in a timely manner. You're talking to him fairly regularly. Have you asked him specifically to do anything? What have you suggested to him that BC wants to see on that?
Well, I called some months ago for a pan-Canadian approach to inter-provincial travel, and the Prime Minister in his most recent comments over the past couple of weeks has been appealing to all Canadians to stay in place. If you don't need to travel within of your province, stay where you are. So I'm grateful that the federal government's showing leadership in that regard. When it comes to our international borders, we worked very aggressively at the beginning of the pandemic because of our proximity to Washington State, where there were a series of outbreaks. We were aware of them very early on because the first case we had here and how Dr. Henry and Public Health got on top of this in January, whereas other provinces were looking into March. So the federal government has been very responsive to our concerns about international travel, and I know that Premier Ford and Premier Legault, particularly, where they've seen starting to level off, but high spikes in cases as they're getting towards the spring break. We don't have the same concerns about spring break where we have seasonal temperatures, but for those living in the heartland of Canada where it's cold today, I can understand they'd want to look at another place to go, but they need to stay home, and the Prime Minister has been focusing on that. If there are new travel restrictions internationally, BC stands ready to work with the federal government to implement them here in BC.
Hi, yes, Premier, you mentioned you think there are too many ways to get into BC to make a 14-day quarantine rule effective, but don't you think implementing that in BC could be considered a deterrent for people in other parts of Canada who might be planning a trip here?
Well, if it's deterrent that we're looking for, I think that saying quite clearly that if you come to British Columbia, you have to abide by the rules here in BC. If we see through public health that an increase in the number of people from outside of British Columbia is contributing significantly to the increase in community outbreaks, we'll take action. We did the legal work. We know what we would be required to do to put in place restrictions on internal travel, but we don't believe it's necessary at this time. I appreciate that Manitoba is going in that direction. Per capita, their case counts are frightening, and I can well understand why they would want to do that. One highway from Ontario in, 4 highways into Saskatchewan. That's it. We have one major city, one major airport, 5. No, that's them. We have one major region, 5 urban centers, major airport, 10 interprovincial airports, some 60 flights a day to YVR, 10 flights a day into Victoria, 27 interprovincial crossings. So it would be a logistical challenge. We had enough challenge with the international borders assisting the revenue services or the Canada Revenue Agency, border services when we imposed the restrictions internationally, we brought forward dozens and dozens and dozens of provincial employees to help backstop the federal initiative. And that's their business. That's what they do every day, is monitor the border where there are checkpoints. We have no checkpoints in British Columbia, so logistically it would be a challenge. How would we monitor that? We have plans in place if we need them, and we'll follow through on that.
Even since you have received that legal opinion on domestic travel, and I know you haven't shared that opinion with us, so I'm just guessing what's in it, it seems to turn on the notion that there's no demonstrated risk to the health of British Columbians. But things have changed since that report came down. You've got the arrival of the variants, the delays in vaccine distribution. How can anyone say with confidence that these variants here do not present a risk to the health of British Columbians?
Well, we can't, and we're not. But what Dr. Henry says regularly is that we are doing our best to suppress community transmission using contact tracing to find where exposures have taken place and taking steps to isolate those individuals. We'll continue to do that. And if there is overwhelming evidence, I mean, Dr. Henry looks at this with her team. Again, I go back to the hours and hours that are spent analyzing data and making determinations on what steps we can take, what advice public health will give to government, and she'll continue to do that. There was not, last week, there was not evidence that inter-provincial travel was contributing to a significant increase in caseloads. Activity in locations where people from outside of British Columbia have congregated, yes, but directly connecting all of those dots has not happened. So when that does, we'll be in a different position than we were when we got the legal opinion, and we'll take steps as required. Again, I want to stress people should stay home. As the Prime Minister has said, as premiers are saying across the country, don't travel unless you have to. That's our biggest hope, is that people will listen and they will abide by these rules that all British Columbians, or the vast majority, have been for months and months and months.
Justine, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a simple one. Can you just clarify if the legal question was on a potential ban on travel, or was it just, as Manitoba has done, quarantine requirements for non-essential travelers?
It was a legal opinion that was presented to Cabinet, and I'll leave it at that.
We have time for one.
Give her another half question on that. I feel badly about that. Go again, Justine. Try another angle.
I'm just trying to get a sense of whether or not what Manitoba is doing is a reasonable measure based on erring on the side of caution. I don't know that Brian Pallister is saying there's evidence of risk. They're saying there is a risk, and we're not going to take that risk.
Maritimes did something similar at the beginning, and Newfoundland particularly was able to ban travel, and that was upheld in their courts. So we've looked at those examples. We will look at whatever comes from Manitoba. They're in the early stages of this initiative. We reached out yesterday for more details, and we have not yet received them, but there will be more coming. Again, I just look at the logistics, not just the legalities, and the logistics are extremely challenging. The best course of action is for Jason Kenney, Scott Moe, Brian Pallister to say to their citizens in Western Canada, stay home. And again, I applaud the Prime Minister on that route now, and he'll be talking more, I'm sure, about international travel as the week unfolds or into next week. But when it comes to people from away coming here, we want to welcome you to British Columbia. Our visitor economy is critically important to us. Our tourism industry depends on people coming from away, but not today.
We have time for one more question today. That will be from Rob Buffum. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question, and it relates to what you've been talking a lot about today. I'm just wondering, yourself and the PHO have been exhorting British Columbians to do more. Wouldn't there even be some symbolic value in implementing what Manitoba is doing? You've talked about all the different, border entries presenting logistical challenges, but wouldn't there be, even from a morale point of view, to show that the government is doing something extra to try and keep people safe?
Well, again, Rob, the challenge is, how would we do it? And I'm just not the type of person that's going to say this is what we're going to set out to do, knowing that we're not able to achieve it in an appropriate time frame. We need to, travel restrictions at the front end were critically important to British Columbia. those international travelers were bringing COVID-19 into British Columbia. We were able to suspend that at great cost to our tourism sector, particularly here in Victoria. And so we don't want to make symbolic statements. We want to make sure we're suppressing community spread, and that means following the orders that are in place. And Dr. Henry's appeal to British Columbians is, I believe, an example of the frustration she feels as we see extraordinary efforts by the vast majority of British Columbians and a handful of people deciding they're above everyone else. That's just not Canadian. It's not who we are. And it does a disservice to all of us and leads to appropriate frustration, not just from the general public, but from community leaders as well.
Do you have a follow-up, Rob?
I do. I'm wondering, beyond symbolism, as a practical matter, Family Day is coming up. Spring break isn't far off. We know people travel to Whistler, amongst other places, from across the country, and realistically, people will continue to do that, especially if there isn't an order in place. What's the likelihood going forward in the next several weeks that there will be tighter restrictions on an inter-provincial basis, as you explore what Manitoba has to say as we go forward?
Yeah. Well, again, we're not ruling anything out. I've never said that. I've said we want to make sure that we can implement a program that would make sense to suppressing community outbreaks or community spread of COVID-19. We will be revisiting, Dr. Henry will be revisiting her orders on February 2nd. Cabinet will hear some new information on modeling and other information next week, and then we'll get advice from public health on where we go from there. But the orders are currently in place, and I think that people who are looking at Family Day as an opportunity to get away, I think this is an opportunity to break out another jigsaw puzzle and gather together and spend some quality time reflecting on how much time we'll have to ourselves once the vaccine program is completed and we get back to normal. For those my kids are no longer at home, for those who have kids at home, spend as much time with them as you can, because they're going to be out the door pretty soon, and that's critically important to all of us. So enjoy your Family Day with your family in your bubble.